The other test that I've mentioned is the writing test. And once again, I'll show you what the testing system looks like. Very similar. So in the writing test, you'll get an introduction page. It just tells you what the test is all about. And then with the test, you'll get a scenario at the top of the page usually. And then on the left-hand side, usually sometimes at the top as well, it will say your task. So in this case, it's to write a formal letter relating to the scenario that's given at the top there. You'll see on the writing test, it will say you will be assessed on, and it will tell you these things. They're the same each time. I'm going to talk through those in a moment. So you don't need to necessarily read through those. And you'll get a text box, a word box to put your information in. Unfortunately, my web page has just crashed. Let's see if I can get that recovered. Unfortunately not. So typical with technology, unfortunately. So you will get a text box to type in. So you'll have a text box to type in, and you can do some formatting and editing, as you probably saw there, and you will have seen. You can make things bold, italic, underlined, move them to left, right, and centre. One thing that isn't on the practice test system, but is in the real test, is a word count box. So at the bottom, when you're writing your answer, the words that you type will be counting up, and that's quite key. You'll see in a moment. I know it's not available on the practice test, but it is available on the real test, so it's something to bear in mind. So with the writing test, you'll be given 2 tasks, and you'll be given an hour and 20 minutes to those. And 2 tasks means 2 documents. You'll be tested to write or type 2 documents. I would say at this point, in terms of time management for the writing test, my recommendation would be to spend a maximum of half an hour on the first document, then a half an hour on the second document, which takes an hour, and then you've got 20 minutes to go back and look at any amends. If you're spending an hour on the first document, you haven't got enough time to go to the second document, and the scoring is fairly even. You might want to try and think about that half an hour, and then 20 minutes for editing. The scenarios will be available throughout, so you can keep looking back at what the information is in there. There's a total of 50 marks. Bizarrely, they give you 26 marks for one document, 24 for the other. So they're almost exactly the same, but not quite. And the pass rate, or the pass mark for the writing test, is approximately 62%, which is 31 marks out of 50. The marking for the writing test is a lot more difficult, it's a lot more detailed, and there is some subjective marking in there in terms of whether your information is concise and logical. So it's a bit more difficult to judge the marking for that, but that's what you're looking around. Excuse me. So I've already mentioned that there's a word count. The suggested word count for all documents that you produce are between 250 and 300 words. They are suggested, they're not essential. However, there are marked punishments if you go too few or too many words. So I would try and aim between that 250 and 300 guide. And as I say, there will be a word count box on the screen for you to follow. Once again, you can use a dictionary. So if there's any words you're unsure how to spell, you can look them up. I would caution against doing that too much, because obviously it takes a little while to look through a dictionary. So if you're really unsure of a word, then do look it up. But don't rely on that too much, I would say. And as you can probably guess, there is a focus, quite a lot of marks available for spelling, punctuation, and grammar in the writing test. So looking at the criteria, what you'll be assessed on are 3 chunks of areas recently. One is, have you communicated your ideas concisely and logically and persuasively is a key thing, and have you presented your information clearly? So basically, what you've put, is it communicated correctly, and is it clear what you're trying to get over? The second section is have you written in the style and the format that's appropriate, and have you used appropriate sentences and paragraphs? So that's more about the structure of how you've written, and again, is it appropriate to the audience? Finally, again, is it fit for purpose, and particularly thinking, have you used accurate punctuation, spelling, and grammar? This fit for purpose is key. Obviously, if you're asked to write a formal letter, that will use a different kind of style of words than if you're asked to write an informal email to a friend. So making it fit for purpose is quite key. So again, thinking about the markers and what the chief examiners say, they say to allow time for all tasks, both tasks. It's pretty clear from the marking that many people rush the second task. So if you use that idea of 30 minutes and 30 minutes, and then you've got enough leeway for 20 minutes at the end, I would suggest it's useful. That time also gives you a chance to proofread. So if you complete the first document and then try and proofread it, you will miss things because you've just typed them. And it's clear, if you've probably done it yourself, where you've written an email or written a note, and then somebody else has looked at it and spotted a spelling mistake quite quickly that you just hadn't seen because it's your own piece of work. If you do the first document move on to the second document, and then go back and proofread the first document, it's like looking at it with a pair of fresh eyes. So it is useful to do the first document until you're happy, move on, and then you've got time to come back. One thing that's key is omitting, or the suggested is a problem, is omitting information that's given in the scenario. So if the scenario sets out a situation, the example I was just trying to show you on the screen there talks about a building development, and it mentions the effects the building development will have on a skate park and on some woods. So as a minimum, you're going to include information about the skate park and about the woods in your text. So make sure you look at the scenario. I think, have I covered everything they've asked for there, and have, if there's any key information there, have I included it? I've mentioned spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Some of the things that come up with spelling are especially words that are used in the scenario. So if there's something in the scenario that you spell regularly spell wrong, make sure you get that right, because that's quite key. And again, if you know the certain words, if you know you always spell because wrong, just because that's something you do, then take extra care if you're writing that word in the test or look it up in the dictionary. Punctuation sometimes highlight are the use of commas and apostrophes. Apostrophes particularly, there's quite a number of rules about where apostrophes should and shouldn't go. So if you're not sure about commas and apostrophes, I'd recommend revising those. And some of the comments they've said about grammar is the chief examiner said they often see phrases that people would say but aren't correct in terms of English. So we was going the shops obviously should be we were going the shops, or I was going the shops should be I were. It shouldn't be, sorry. Someone put I were happy, and it should be I was happy. So it's thinking about, if you may say things in a colloquial way, however, make sure there's correct English when using. Particularly that's on could have. I could have done that. Actually, the phrase is I could have done that. Often when we speak, we shorten it down to of, but the word is I could have done that. So to, again, be aware that you're writing for English, not necessarily the way you speak. There's widespread use of a small I instead of a capital I when you're talking about yourself. So then I went to the shops should include a capital I, because you're talking about a person. So you've replaced, rather than saying then John went to the shops, you replaced it with yourself. So I, so that should always be a capital. Include, and that will be the same if you're using a short word such as I'm, I've, I'd, and those kind of things. So that's quite a key one. An I on its own should always be a capital, so do look out for that. Obviously, the other thing with capitals is about start of sentences and proper nouns is to be aware of. Often, the chief marketer talks about a poor format or structure and the documents not being fit for purpose. I'm going to run through some things very shortly in terms of the type of documents you will have to be expected to write, go through some of the structure. They've suggested there's sometimes an overuse of bullet points or lists. Bullet points and lists are fine in the documents if they bring something to it and they are relevant. However, if all you're doing is a series of bullet points or lists, then obviously that's not using the best format of English. And the other thing people often do is don't show paragraphs, or sometimes do a paragraph that's just a single sentence. So a paragraph is normally, would normally be two or more sentences, and usually on a specific topic. And you would usually separate paragraphs by having a line between them. So do be careful to try and identify your paragraphs and split them up appropriately. So I mentioned there's certain type of documents you'll be asked to write. You may be asked to write, or probably will be asked to write, a letter. With a letter, then you put your address at the top right-hand side, but you should not include your name at that point, because you're going to sign the letter off from yourself, so you don't need to include your name. Following this should be the date written in full. Some people write that on the left, some people on the right. That doesn't matter as long as it is written, and you would expect it to be written in full Monday, the 4th of August, 2019, for example. Then usually on the left, the address of the person or the company that you're writing to. If you know their job title, then you can include that there, such as I've done on the screen. You will then start your letter with either Dear Sir or Madam, or maybe To Whom It May Concern, if you don't know the name of the person, or you might write Dear Manager or For the Attention of, for example. If you do know the person, you'd put Dear Mr. or Mrs. or Dear John or Dear Mary, wherever it might be. Once you've written your letter, there's two key ways of ending a formal letter. If you don't know the person's name of who you're writing to, so if you've started with Dear Sir or Madam or To Whom It May Concern, you'll end your letter with Yours faithfully. If you do know the name of the person you're sending it to, so if you put Dear Mr. Bloggs, Dear Mrs. Bloggs, you would end your letter with Yours sincerely. You should notice there as well, in terms of capital letters, there's a capital for Y, because it's the start of a sentence. There's no need to capitalize faithfully or sincerely, because there's no need to. And then there's a comma, and then below that you put your name. So looking at those is key, and make sure you choose correctly whether it should be faithfully if you don't know the name of the person, or sincerely. If you're not asked to write a letter, there's a strong chance you'll be asked to write an email, and you'll be given a box such as that to be able to write your email in. Obviously, you put who it's to. If they've asked you to copy anybody in, you put them in CC, and then you'd put a subject that's usually 2 or 3 words. It just gives a quick summary of what the email's about. It shouldn't be a long sentence within there. One of the key things about email is, although it's a quick and instant form of communication, it should still conform to standard English. Things like paragraph, spelling, punctuation, grammar, again, no text talk. Now, we do tend to do that in emails because emails are quite widely used now, and we may use shorter form of communication. For the test, ideally, you want to use correct and standard English. There isn't as much of a format in terms of how you start and end a letter, an email. It'll be more about who you're writing to. So if they've asked you to do a formal email, you might start it with good morning or good afternoon or dear, or to whom it may concern. If it's an informal email to your cousin in Australia, you could start it with hello or hi. Similarly with closing, it's not as formal as using yours sincerely or yours faithfully. A lot of people would close a formal email with things like kind regards or regards, best wishes, etc. And again, if you're emailing somebody that's a friend, you might end it with thanks, cheers, see you soon, those kind of things. So the starting and ending email is more about who you're writing to make it appropriate. You may be asked to write an article, and it's not suggesting an article for a broadsheet newspaper. It's suggesting it's usually for a staff newsletter or a bulletin or maybe the local paper. An article should have a heading, big and bold, usually in the middle of the page. You might underline it, increase the font. It obviously clearly shows what the article's about. Then under that, you might have your first paragraph would either be like a kind of strap line or something set in the scene, maybe a short paragraph, 1 sentence, that just sets the scene about what you're writing about. They want to see who wrote the article. So somewhere in there, you'll see the example from the newspaper on the right-hand side there. It just says by James Pugh. You could just do that below the title, put by and then your name. Or you might put in the sentence, our correspondent, Joe Blogs, has written blah, blah, blah. So somewhere in that document, you want to explain that who is written it. Articles, the markers usually like to see what did people say. They want quotes within the articles. And obviously, you'll need to make those up, so be as inventive as you want. But it may be you're writing an article about a local charity event, and you might put the event went really well, and the manager of the local care home said, and then in speech mark, you put, this was an amazing event. Thanks to everybody who wrote it. So making up a quote is quite useful for an article. One thing you often find with articles, if you look at magazines and newspapers, they're usually shorter paragraphs. They're not usually 4 or 5 sentences to a paragraph. This is where you may use 1 sentence or maybe 2 sentences per a paragraph. The final 2 things that you might be asked to write. One is a report. There's no necessarily set way of laying out a report, but one of the key things about reports is detail. The whole point of it being a report is that they want as much detail. So either a report of what's happened, lots of detail, or a report of recommendations for the future. You may still have a heading, maybe subheadings if appropriate. You may have different styles of features, so you may do some numbering, you may do some bullet points and lists. So for example, if your report is making suggestions for work, you may have a bullet point that says suggestion 1 and then some information, and then below that bullet point suggestion 2, some information, and so on. One thing that you would only expect in a report is a clear introduction. I am writing this report because blah, 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 and then a conclusion. So if it is about recommendation, you might say, in conclusion, I would recommend option 3 is the best because, and then you give your reason. So it's important in a report to have a clear introduction and a conclusion. The final type of document you can be asked to write is a speech. Now, obviously, the speech is as you would speak, so you have written it as you would speak, but they do want within there some sort of opening acknowledgement of the audience you're speaking to and an introduction about your topic. And they'd want to see you bringing the speech to a close at the end. So some way of, again, of summing up, concluding, thanking people for attending, those kind of things. So that's only a very short run through of the English reading and English writing tests. Hopefully the learning that you've had will back up some of the things, most of the things that I've gone through there. There's obviously the chance to do practice tests if you haven't done them already, or if you've done some, then you can go on and do some more. If there's any of the topics that I've gone through that you're a bit unsure on, obviously you may need to research them, but please do drop me a line and let me know, and I can support you with them if need be. And most of all, it's to say good luck with your test. Thanks very much for listening today.